G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. On the 27th of January, the day after Amnesia Day. And I didn't know quite what to do about Amnesia Day this year, so I got drunk and I didn't do anything about Amnesia Day yesterday. However, refried bean dip asked me if I would do a book review. Of Blood on the Wattle, a copy of which I was recently given by Lloyd Hornsby, artist in residence and proprietor with his wife Wendy of Garawa Gallery in Glen Innes. So before we begin to get the flavour and savour it all, I'm going to pirate some of this Amnesia Day by the Juice Media channel, ideally while flipping.
Government, are you ready for Amnesia Day? Amnesia Day is our national holiday when we come together as one to forget our dodgy history with the help of our favourite memory inhibitor. Tastes like a peaceful settlement. Amnesia Day! Sadly, Amnesia Day is under threat. Each year, more and more Aussies are refusing to celebrate on January 26th. What's causing this perverse behaviour? Reading a history book. Some of these factards are spending Amnesia Day actually remembering what it commemorates, which of course is the day the British arrived and started colonising the lands of the oldest continuing culture on Earth, the kangaroo. Amnesia Day! Worst of all, city councils are responding to their community's concerns by moving events and celebrations to another day. But don't worry, here at the Australian government, we know how to gently bring everyone together in harmony. Celebrate, you pieces of shit! Because Australia Day is all about honouring what makes us great, our freedom. It's now mandatory towards citizenship only on January 26th. So come on, Australia, crack a tinny, shower a baby sheet, stick a flag on your car or your knob, and crank up the hottest 100, which has now been moved to, what the fuck? It is now mandatory to have fun only on January 26th. You know what? Fuck it. We'll change the date. Then we can pretend that we fixed everything and ignore the structural changes our First Nations actually want us to make. Nah, just kidding. We'll keep the date and keep pretending to fix shit. Like by appointing this dickhead to the Indigenous envoy. Lol. Here's how you can help save Amnesia Day from all these woke. Don't make the day political. Actually, please do it. FOMO really needs to soak a culture war before the election. It's all we've got left. Don't question tradition. That's a sign of a mature thinking nation which is able to grow. Mature thinking nation bad. Rat-assed unconscious nation good. And if anyone questions tradition, tell them to get over it and that it's all in the past. Sure, you'll be saying the exact opposite when Anzac Day comes round in a few months, but by then you'll have forgotten all about it anyway. Happy Amnesia Day. Authorised by the Department for Piting like it's 1788.
There you go. And that's what their channel page looks like. I highly recommend it to anybody who liked what they just saw. So we're looking at European newspaper illustrations. Massacre on the Darling. We'll have a little bit of a look at some of the massacres that happened around here, sort of thing. We speak of the Three Rivers, manning Hastings and Macleay, with Armidale here and Deepwater here, and I'm about here at Dundee. Bluff Rock is just a little bit north of me. Aboriginal family on the banks of the Macleay River. Okay, Bluff Rock Massacre, Tenterfield. Go to Tenterfield today and the local Bundjalung people will still tell the story of the Bluff Rock Massacre. It is, by sharp contrast with the Giralli Creek Massacre, an event which has been well recorded by both local Aborigines and white historians. The massacre occurred at Bluff Rock near Tenterfield around October 1844. As far as anyone can tell, it was a case of competition for land and food. The early settlers to the area brought sheep. The sheep ate the native vegetables, grasses, and seeds indiscriminately. Settlers did not seem to realise that 60 to 70% of the Aboriginal diet on the New England tablelands was made up of the wild vegetables and seeds, which were now being eaten by the herds of sheep which covered the grasslands. Retaliation of some sort was inevitable. The most vulnerable people were the shepherds, who tended the sheep and were often forced to go far from the safety of the homestead. In October 1844, a shepherd named Robinson on the property known as Bolivia, which was owned by the Irby brothers, was found beaten to death and fell floating naked in a creek. This was a very serious act of reprisal by the Bundjalung. The Irby brothers, furious at the killing, were determined to revenge the death. They gathered a posse of 4 men, which included station hands from Bolivia as well as some riders from Deepwater, which was owned by the Wendyer family. There would be no innocent until proven guilty concept of British law applied here. There would be no onus of proof on the part of the posse. All they wanted was revenge, and constantly all they did was chase after any Aborigines unlucky enough to come into their sights. The result was a massacre of huge proportions. The Irbies and Wendyers found some Aborigines who were fleeing towards the high country near Bluff Rock. The posse found out so that the Aborigines could be herded in front of them. Slowly and systematically, they pushed the Bundjalung towards Bluff Rock. The Bundjalung group comprised men, women, and children. The posse closed on the group until they had no alternative. They would be shot if they moved toward the posse and tried to escape. Instead, they threw themselves off Bluff Rock. For decades afterwards, it was said that the posse saved one small child. He was raised by one of the Euro peons who had been instrumental in killing all his family. Later, Edward Irby was to write, "The blacks saw us coming and hid themselves among the rocks. One, in his haste, dropped poor Robinson's coat, so we know we were onto the right tribe. If the natives had taken to their heels, they might well have got off safe. Instead of doing this, however, they got their fighting men together to attack us, so we punished them severely and proved our superiority to them." If this sounds like someone who was driven to violent actions by frustration, it is worth recording that Lieutenant Colonel Godfrey Charles Mundy, who rode through the New England area and recorded his impressions in a book published in 1855, wrote, "It was common after an inroad of the blacks upon the sheep and cattle for men of 2 or 3 adjoining stations to assemble for a regular and indiscriminate slaughter in which young and old were shot down. Reprisals were undertaken on a large scale which never reaches the ears of government, or, if it reached them at all, finds them conveniently deaf. Men, women, and children are butchered without distinction or stint. It becomes by practice a pleasurable excitement. Occasionally bush gossip let out that the blackfellas were going to get a dose, and indeed, in more than one known instance, damper, well hocussed, with arsenic or strychnine, was laid in the way of the savages, whereby many were killed. Some attempts were made to bring justice to the perpetrators of this cowardly as well as barbarous act, but in the bush, justice is too often deaf, dumb, and lame, as well as blind. The Clarence River Massacre. Massacres of large numbers of Aborigines were occurring from the New England ranges down to the sea throughout the 1840s and 1850s, as the white settlers tried to purge the area of its, quote, troublesome blacks. The scale of the killing was so great and the silence imposed by the executions resulting from the Myall Creek massacres was so complete that it is now quite impossible to estimate how many people were killed. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the massacres was the willing participation of the government's officials. In 1839, a part-time poet, James George Humpy MacDonald, who was acting as the Commissioner of Crown Lands, named the area now known as the City of Armidale after his clan's baronial estate of Armatdale, with an A, on the Isle of Skye. Around this time, his acting appointment became official. Officially, MacDonald was a representative of the New South Wales government and therefore was obliged to uphold the law of the colony. In 1845, MacDonald reported to the New South Wales Legislative Council that, quote, "The Aborigines have been for the last 3 years in friendly relations with the Euro peons in the district," unquote. It was a typically dishonest sleight of hand. It may have been, quote, "friendly," unquote, from 1842 to 1845, but in 1841, MacDonald had actually led a posse against a group of Aborigines who had been camped on the banks of the Orara River near Grafton. So much for friendly relations. MacDonald's and his posse had surrounded the large camp during the night, and at daybreak, when the Aborigines were still asleep under the trees by the riverbank, the posse had charged into the camp indiscriminately, shooting men, women, and children. In the melee that followed, try to do 2 things at once. In the melee that followed, Some Aborigines were lucky enough to reach the river, where they tried to swim to safety only to be shot as they fled. It was said that for some days afterwards, bodies of murdered Aborigines floated down the river past the settlement at South Grafton. The cruel irony of the situation was that MacDonald claimed that the attack was to revenge a theft from Ramornie Station. Hardly an offence worthy of a massacre. Subsequently, the theft was discovered to have been committed by a white person, a hut keeper named Lynch. The Commissioner of Crown Lands had murdered a large number of totally innocent Aborigines. He was never prosecuted. Darky Point Massacre. There are a few really detailed first-person accounts of the massacres which occurred in the mid-19th century. However, in Baal Belbora, Geoffrey Blonfield reveals that while trying to track down the events which inspired Judith Wright's poem Nigger's Leap, he came across F. Eldershaw's 1851 publication, Australia as It Really Is, in which Eldershaw, who moved to the New England Ranges in 1841, recalls in great detail how 3 of his workers were killed and 2,000 of his sheep were stolen by some local Aborigines, written in the cumbersome and florid style of the mid-19th century, and obviously eager to explain how a massacre was necessary and indeed beneficial for both blacks and whites. Eldershaw's account of the Darky Point Massacre is a remarkable first-person account. It offers a rare opportunity to look into the minds of a white settler who, confronted with a crime beyond the limits of the colonial legal system, simply took the law into his own hands. Eldershaw's attitude to the massacre is probably best summed up in the title piece of the piece, An Adventure with the Blacks. Far away from the busy haunts of civilised man, unprotected by military or police, an adventurous band of squatters hemmed in by the daily encroachments of their agricultural neighbours, bought out by moneyed land proprietors or pressed by their rapidly increasing flocks and herds, sought in the more distant regions of the interior of this great terra incognita those broad acres of hill and plain so absolutely essential to the success of pastoral avocations. Among this little band, the writer of these pages journeyed forth, and after long and arduous search selected his squattage, a very nice piece of country on the northwestern skirts of the fertile district of the New England. Rough and horribly tedious were our first struggles, blah, 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 blah. Towards the close of the autumn of 41, after a beautiful, most prosperous season, we were miserably startled from the unconscious lull of security in which long continued impunity from harm invariably produced by the appalling intelligence that one of my outstations had been attacked. Accompanied by 3 neighbours, I immediately proceeded to reconnoitre the spot of this atrocity. The tracks, campfires and numerous gunyahs clearly indicated the recent presence of a tribe of natives numbering, we surmised, at least 200. The hut was empty, but we could plainly perceive by blood and other evidences of a deadly struggle that at least one of the unfortunate fellows had here met his dreadful end. A still further and more minute examination of every track and indication around reveals to our practised eyes mysteriously but unmistakably full evidences of the conduct of the whole catastrophe. Possessed of the information thus it was possible to obtain, we returned to arrange a party for immediate pursuit. This goes on for pages, and I have about a minute. Fixing a regular watch and advising the utmost caution, we at length betook ourselves to repose. The briefest possible slumber fell to my individual lot, for suddenly an alarm of fire and the startling cry of the blacks, effectively dispelled all feelings of drowsiness. For some moments, however, we were utterly unable to perceive or appreciate the exact nature of our hazardous position. A bright and rapidly increasing glare of light pouring down in circling eddies from the hills and sweeping grassy gullies at our feet surrounded us, and effectively excluded every distant object from our observation. In this perplexity, 2 or 3 heavy spears darting amongst us sufficiently indicated the whereabouts and intentions of our agile though invisible foes. We discharged 4 barrels in their direction, and immediately a yell, the wildest and most fraught with fear ears ever heard, rang through the burning forest. No time was evidently to be lost. A moment's delay, for aught we knew might prove fatal. By one portion of the party our horses were saddled and all prepared for immediate movement, while the other, with leafy boughs of trees, set vigorously to work to stop the approach of the raging element, which every moment came more near with a fierce and rapid sweeps. What he's saying is that the Aborigines have set a fire to try and wipe out the whitefellas' camp just before sunrise. In an incredibly short space of time, the whole range of mountains was on fire. Miles of long, dry grass, thousands of huge trees, and all the dense mass of withered underwood by which they were encompassed were enveloped in one enormous, unapproachable flame. To proceed through this vast burning mass was obviously impossible. Retreat, however, seemed equally hazardous. No course, apparently, was left but to wait for the coming day and force our way, if practicable, towards where some creek or watercourse might reasonably be expected to have intervened to check the spread of this disastrous fire. An ominous stir among the blacks in the direction of this spot alarmed us for the safety of our friends and reminded us of the necessity for immediate action. Pouring in, therefore, upon the eager but unconscious crowd below, the contents of 10 barrels, a fearful change was effected in their savage glee. A scream of mingled consternation and surprise, a rush in reckless despair towards the only means of escape from their exposed and dangerous elevation, a murderous and tumultuous struggle amongst themselves, their yells of mingled hate and agony, as grappling together in the last gasp of death, the foremost of them fell, urged over the ledge's brink by the pressing crowd behind that madly on. Over the ledge's brink into the yawning sepulchre beneath was all of the horrid scene that the increasing darkness of the night enabled us to clearly perceive.